So eventually walking down the seawall and walking and leaving Ramones, past the Spindrift Hotel, past a few other places on the way, down the beach. The beaches were being rigorously cleaned by the little guys that were employed at the hotels. And I came across Dave at Fido's Courtyard. Fido's Courtyard was on the beach. It had a bar, it had some little restaurants and cafes in it, both upstairs and downstairs. It had local art shops, and it had a stage where local bands and some American guys, British guys, when they came down, would pull out guitars and they would have sing-songs. It was absolutely brilliant. Dave was entertaining at the bar. He was telling stories of daring do, and he was just like, Dave was like gravity. Dave was like gravity. He pulled you in. He was brilliant. Yeah, big blue, pale blue, sparkly eyes and mad ginger hair. And yeah, he was. Everybody knew Dave, and a lot of people loved him. And he was just sitting talking to people, and Dave was a great salesman. Dave was selling Dive Dreams, his company. He was selling scuba, and yeah, he probably, I think on that particular day, ended up getting a group of 12 Americans who had previously booked with another dive group. I think it was Amigos Del Mar, which was Friends of the Sea or something like that, Friends of the Ocean. And they ended up cancelling with Amigos Del Mar and came to Dive Dreams. And that didn't go down too well. That pissed off Amigos Del Mar. And but that was just the name of the game. I think Dave probably undercut the price a little bit, which everybody was doing, and so they came to us. These guys were already divers. I think Dave had said he'd met a couple the previous year, and they came back and they said that they would look for Dave and they would dive with him. Hey ho, Dave reeled them in, and we were going to be busy with them for about 2 weeks, which was really, really good. So Dave spotted me, called me over, and introduced me as his cousin, introduced me as an instructor, and they all needed refresher training, because if you haven't dove for 6 months or maybe a year, it was recommended that you got in the water the day before, refreshed yourself with your skills, the tanks and everything, prior to diving, the following day. So my job the next morning would be to refresh everybody with their skills, which was on the cards for me too. So Dave had given the students that I had taught that morning, Dave had given them the day off to go and do a bit more studying, and after the next day, after I would be teaching the refresher course, I would then be teaching in the classroom again, and Richie would take the divers diving and so forth, and it would basically go from there. So that was the plan for the following days. So I noticed when I was sitting there with Dave, there was a group of local guys at one of the tables, and one of these guys was a big guy, and he was known locally as Patojo. I don't know if that was his real name. And I was to learn a few days later that David and Patojo had a falling out, and it was previously over David being a white dive instructor on the island. So most of the local guys on general were pretty cool, but when anybody new came to the island, as when anybody new came to the UK or to Northern Ireland, i.e. the Polish or Lithuanians back in the day, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they started, doing the jobs that other people didn't want, and it even though the people didn't want to do them, it fucking bent them out of shape and caused problems. So San Pedro wasn't a massive island, or the town wasn't a big town. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was relatively fresh. There wasn't, that many They didn't allow 3-story buildings, so you only allowed 2-story buildings, but they allowed the footings for a 3rd story to be started or partially built. And so it was quite small. The population wasn't massive. It was quite hard to get a visa or a license to be a dive instructor. But David, being David, knew some of the guys on the mainland and had ended up getting me an instructor visa for the year, which cost, I think it was about $500 US, 1,000 Belize, which wasn't really expensive, to be honest. But then again, that was something David did for me. He didn't want me to pay him back again. David was like my dad, you know. He made sure that I had the best of everything. He made sure if I needed something, you know, that there wasn't much pressure on me, and that I didn't have to struggle, you know. I never asked David for anything, but, you know, he always did for me. And that was, you know, something that, you know, I had never forgotten David for. He always did stuff for me. He always made sure that I was okay, that I was fed, that I was clothed, that I was housed. You know, he did everything. I didn't have to worry about stuff. So he was great like that. So this Patojo guy had been sitting there and, you know, giving David the eyeball and all this type of stuff, and David knew it. And he was sitting with another guy called Gutsy. He was a big fucking greaseball, long, wet, raggedy hair. He looked like a Mexican bandito, as they all did. Looked like something out of a fucking Wild West Western. They were all kind of like fat, heavily built. There was another guy there called Sabbath, and they all really disliked Dave. There was another little guy there called Freddie Guerrero, I think his name was, and this fucker always carried a fillet knife, a fish knife. He was a little skinny guy. But Pedro was a unit. Pedro was about 6'2", 6'3", a big local diver, a big local fisherman. Pedro was a free diver, so he was known to free dive for lobster out of season and catch them when he had clients or divers with him, and he would take them to a remote part of the island, and he would cook the lobsters and stuff like this. And lobsters were seasonal, okay? You can only get them in the seasons. So once the dive students had left, and they were going to see us in the morning, they'd all paid David cash at the bar, paid him cash, paid him 2 weeks cash. So David was literally loaded with thousands of dollars. Now these fucking banditos at the table had seen this, and it fucking pissed them off. It really pissed them off. So Patojo shouted something up to David, and in Spanish, and David fucking gave something back to him. Of course, Patojo gets all bent out of shape, and, you know, and fucking starts kicking off and stuff. And I turn around and looked at him, and he starts giving me all this type of stuff. I asked David what the fuck his problem was, or who he was, and then Dave explained to me that the year or so before, they have local meetings, and all the dive masters and all the assistant instructors and instructors would have to go to these town meetings about the diving and preservation of the island and stuff. And David had went to one of the meetings with another guy called Gary Cooper. Gary was another white guy from Birmingham in the UK, and he had worked and lived and dived with Dave for a little bit. Gary was an instructor also, and I was to meet Gary a few weeks from that particular day. Anyway, David went to this meeting, and all the locals were sitting on chairs, and they told David and Gary to sit on the floor. And fucking Dave refused. Now Gary was a big guy. Gary was like 6'2", a big handsome dude. He looked like fucking one of these guys out of Wham. Long hair and a ponytail, well built, really, really nice guy. And apparently Gary sat on the floor. Gary was one of these guys that didn't like trouble. He was a big dude, you know. Gary wasn't a fighter. I would have hated to see him kick off. He wasn't soft, but, you know, he was a guest on the island. He could have been arrested. He could have been kicked off the island. He could have been put in jail. So many things could have happened. Gary just wanted to keep the peace, and he sat on the floor, and Dave refused. And him and Patojo ended up having an argument. And that night, in town, Patojo blindsided David with a punch in the face. And him and Dave got into it. And Patojo bit David just below his left nipple, took a lump out of him, and Dave ended up biting the end of his little pinky finger off. So that was the thing about David. If David got a hold of you, David would bite lumps out of you. David would bite lumps out of your face, just bite lumps out of you. So Patojo locked onto David, took a bite out of his chest, and Dave took the finger off Patojo, and broke Dave's 2 bottom teeth, which he had to have later fixed. And that was the history between them two. David was never one to go look for trouble. He just never ran from it.